Thanks and good morning everyone. Nice to be down here in Geelong. Doesn't seem like too long ago when I was sitting in the audience like this myself in Orange at Orange Ag College, so it's not as close to as many nice beaches as you guys have got, but almost as cold. So what I'd like to do today is just to give you a bit of an overview of the NFF, what we're doing. Hopefully some of you have heard of the NFF and state farming organisations and commodity groups of which they're our members. So wanted to just take you through what is a really busy and dynamic and exciting landscape for agriculture. And as you guys sitting in the audience, as Brett said, huge opportunities I think for you as the next professionals in what is a hugely exciting industry. And then I'll go through sort of our platform and our agenda, and then touch on some of the trade and market access issues. And then hopefully we can have a bit of a discussion at the end. So if you've got any questions, sing out as I go through. There's quite a few slides, so I won't bore you too much. I'll just quickly flick through them. So in terms of agriculture, we see it, as I said, as a hugely positive industry. And we think one of the only sectors in Australia that can double production in the next 15 or 20 years, as Brett alluded to, a whole range of opportunities with free trade agreements that the government's recently signed and export opportunities that will flow from those. In terms of where we're at the moment, about a $50 billion industry. So we think there's a huge opportunity to actually double that in about 15 or 20 years. And I mean, that's pretty rare. You look at the mining industry, about 20 years or so ago, it was roughly valued at, I think, about $60 billion, and now it's up to about $160 billion. So obviously there's huge drivers in China and other markets when we come to products like iron ore and others. But with some of these markets opening up, the expendable income that the consumers have got in these markets, there is significant opportunity to grow what we know is high quality traceable, safe food in a whole range of sectors. You can see there expected gains across a whole range of different sectors. So if we're going to get to $100 billion, how do we do it? We've got a really loose recipe, I suppose, and it involves attracting people like you guys in the audience to stay in the industry and to drive the industry and take advantage of all of these opportunities, making sure they've got the human talent to drive the agenda. We've got to get flexible investment, and that's domestic or foreign. We really need investment in the industry. Without that, we're not going to be able to take advantage of all of these opportunities we continually hear about. And that is right across the spectrum, from new technology to infrastructure to skills and development that you guys will know a lot about. That will, of course, lead to accelerating productivity across the farm gate, leading to improved returns. Premium branding, which I'll talk about in a little bit, true Aussie branding, a digital connectivity, digital platform, digital engagement across the ag sector, which we think is really lacking, and of course market access, which we've heard a little bit about already. So from an NFF perspective, that's kind of our recipe for success, and we're trying to address those or take up that recipe through three basic platforms. An online platform, true Aussie branding, which I'll go through, and a stronger, unified, more effective advocacy role for NFF and its members. So I'll quickly flick through those three platforms. In terms of the online or digital presence, certainly your generation and generations to come, the landscape has really changed. So we need, as an industry and as a sector and as an organisation from an NFF perspective, we need to have a mechanism to better engage with industry, that is the farm business industry, stakeholders across the supply chain, so retailers and other commodity sectors that we know engage across the entire supply chain, and importantly the community. There's a real gap, we think, in engaging with the community and tapping into what we know is goodwill, trust, and a high regard for the ag and farming sector. So we see that as a real gap in the current arrangements as they currently are with state farming organisations and national groups and commodity groups. It's really just not hitting the mark. It's not engaging. We're getting town hall meetings where people are sort of not turning up to, not joining or renewing their membership of organisations, we've actually got to change the game a little bit, and we think an online platform will be able to will help us do that. So from a farm business perspective, we think that, or we know through research, that the farm businesses need 4 things. That is advocacy and lobbying, so to make sure that we engage in the policy development space with key decision makers. We've got to have some member benefits, so we've got to get some flow-on benefits from actually being a member of an organisation, whether that's discounts or services. There's got to be a business proposition from a membership, and that relates to best practice management. It really means day-to-day operations on farm. What is actually going to help you to return your, improve your profitability on farm, and it's got to have that community engagement sector, which I talked about, which is a real vacuum at the moment. As we know, there's a whole range of organisations out there at the moment that are playing in this space, and in fact we could say that we're in the race, or when I say we, I mean the agriculture sector and the industry and farm businesses within it. We could say that we're losing the race, but we could also say that we're actually not even in the race, that we're actually being outgunned by some of those organisations you can see on the screen there: Animals Australia, Get Up, World Wildlife Foundation, RSPCA, a whole range of other groups that propose to represent agriculture and possibly don't represent the best interests of agriculture. And that little blur in the bottom left-hand corner there is the NFF and its membership. And really, it's a pretty frank and honest assessment of where the agriculture sector is from a digital engagement, a digital platform, digital profile. We're just not actually in the race. We need to change that. So what we're in the process of building is a digital platform. I've loosely called it, and it's probably a little bit wrong, but I've called it a Facebook for farmers. And it's a whole lot more than that, but it's really just having a profile for the ag sector. So what you see on the screen there is a bit of a mock-up from Luke Harrison. He's a cattle farmer from WA. I hope you can see that. So he's a member of Cattle Council. You can see a little icon there on the bottom there. So this is his page that he opens up on when he gets up, he or she gets up, in this case it's Luke, but he gets up in the morning, checks his phone, checks his tablet, and he can see on there what the news stories of the day are, what the weather is, what his mates are doing on the right-hand side there, what the cattle market's doing in the middle there. So that's his engagement page. It's the first thing that he or she opens up on when he gets up in the morning. You can then click on to a policy page. So if he's really interested in engaging in the policy debate, then he's got access to a whole range of different opportunities to engage in that debate. So that could be his local member, up there in the right-hand corner. Can engage, see what's happening from a government perspective in terms of bills that are going through policy development processes. Looking at some of the threats or opportunities in your electorate, specifically down to his location, so he can click on there and register a vote or put a view forward in terms of the issues that are actually facing his business, and a whole range of other different interactive engagement pieces where Luke can have a say from a policy perspective. And that's just, again, just a bit of an example of how it could translate into a phone that for a $1 litre milk, or Animals Australia putting shopping bags into Coles a couple of years ago. Some of you might have been familiar with that. Really just allows the farm business sector to engage from a digital platform in a coordinated, comprehensive and consistent way. And that's out there at the moment. It's a little bit fragmented, a little bit like the ag industry overall. But what we're building is a platform that will engage a much stronger voice, much more effective voice, much more two-way conversation with the ag sector and farm businesses. So what does it mean? It means that we'll have a much more informed and active response in the online community. We'll have unprecedented insight into election issues, because again, that's where we need to engage with the decision makers in government in Canberra and at the state level for that matter. And we'll have a hotline to influencers around rural and regional Australia. And we'll actually be able to be in the game with organisations like Animals Australia, PETA, Greenpeace, WWF, a whole range of other different groups, Get Up, where we're just not engaged at the moment. And to be honest, we're actually being outgunned and outspoken from agriculture point of view. These organisations are proposing to represent agriculture, and we're just not being able to respond well enough. So I'll move on now quickly to True Aussie, a branding process. You recall that part of that success for a $100 billion industry was a consistent, coordinated brand. And if we look at where the gains are going to come from for that $100 billion industry, branding, from our perspective, is a really key part of that. So what NFF has partnered with Meat and Livestock Australia, who have developed the True Aussie brand over the last year or so, researched it and tested it in a whole range of overseas markets, and they've come up with True Aussie. And it's linked or focused on the red meat sector at the moment, but we think it's got broader application across the whole of the ag industry. So that what it would be is an umbrella brand that all commodities and all brands could come underneath, and that this brand would be represented in some of these overseas markets that Brett has talked about. And what it would be is a platform that red meat or horticulture or dairy or grains or any other sector could come underneath. And when it's represented in the shops and in the retail outlets overseas, is that True Aussie would carry with it a whole range of characteristics and qualities that are consistent across the agriculture production sector. So as I say, there's been a whole lot of research put into this, and where we're up to is working with MLA in the first instance in a pilot project to see how it goes in some of these overseas markets and build on the testing that's already been done. But what it does is really tap into some of those characteristics that we know around better production systems, trusted partners, traceability, quality, sustainability, all of these factors that can be built into this True Aussie brand. Because as we know, at the moment there's numerous brands out there representing Australia. We know that New Zealand's been successful in promoting their 100% pure brand, and again, we need to be on the front foot and get an overarching brand for Australian agriculture that we can all subscribe to. So there's a little bit of work to do. In fact, there's a lot of work to do. It's a pilot project at the moment with the red meat sector, and the challenge, as you can see, it's been tested in a range of markets. And the challenge really is to get that comprehensive overarching approach. So it's a little bit similar to the tourism market, where there's different states and different regions around Australia that still represent their own characteristics. So down here you've got the coastline, the surf coast I think it is, or the characteristics of the Geelong district. You've got the Gold Coast, you've got Margaret River in Perth. All of them come under this Tourism Australia. Australia is a nice place to come and have a holiday. Similarly, for Australian agriculture produces good, high quality, safe, traceable products. And by the way, there's a whole lot of different characteristics from each sector that come under this one overarching brand. So, focusing on the red meat sector, plans to work with other sectors to make sure that they're comfortable, it doesn't compromise any existing brands, and there's been a whole lot of work that's been done on existing brands. We don't see it as compromising those, we see it as complementing those, but a whole lot of work to be done yet on that. So I'll move on now to streamline and strengthen, and that's really just a restructure of the NFF organisation and its membership, and I won't spend too much time on that. It's a bit of an internal process. The NFF is 35 years old. The landscape's changed in those last 35 years in terms of advocacy and policy development process, so we need to change with it. We need to adapt, we need to get on a digital platform and have a much more effective and streamlined organisation. And we're working on that at the moment with state farming organisations and commodity groups to make sure that grassroots farmers have a voice with stakeholders across the supply chain, whether that's retailers or governments or anyone else in international spaces. We've got a coordinated and consistent message right from the farm gate. So, trade policy, what I came here to talk about. So obviously, as Brett has alluded to, and most of you will know, that Australian agriculture has always been export dominated, and with growing markets the way that they are is likely to be in the future, in addition to a slow small population that was slow growing and small population that we've got in here in Australia, trade is absolutely critical to Australian farmers, and it will always be. So we're committed to opening new export markets for Australian farmers, and it's our main objective really is to just reduce the distortions and liberalise trade, because Australia has done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of deregulation and liberalising our markets. What we want to do is to make sure that other markets continue down that path, and there's a whole lot of concerns and work to be done in that regard, but we're committed to trying to reduce those subsidies, tariffs and quotas. We, from a trade perspective, advocate for policy on a range of levels, but at the multilateral level, World Trade Organization, at the regional or plurilateral level, there's examples like, again, as Brett has referred to, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, some of which you would have seen over the last few days, and bilateral agreements like the ones Brett talked about with China, Korea and Japan. Our objective in terms of trade policy is that multilateral trade agreements are the most effective way, in theory, to go about trade liberalisation and reducing subsidies and barriers and objections to trade, but it's very difficult. As more and more countries join the World Trade Organization, it just becomes very difficult to get anything done, and everyone points to each other about whose fault it is. So what we've seen over the last few years is that there's been a huge increase in the number of free trade agreements, mainly because they work better than the WTO arrangements. You can see there the growth in trade agreements over the last 20 years or so, and again that's largely because the WTO is a bit of a lame duck, unfortunately, but it does set the rules for the trading environment. We still have to subscribe to it, of course, but it is just really difficult to actually get outcomes from that vehicle, and there's been a whole lot of benefits flowing from the free trade agreements. They're much more tangible, easier to do, but still difficult, but much more flow-on benefits. In terms of the risks of sort of free trade agreements, you may have sort of heard about this noodle bowl effect. As we continue to sign free trade agreements, they tend to stack up with different countries. They tend to stack up on top of one another, and it's difficult to actually see what agreement you're working under and which agreement cuts across which country and which commodity and that sort of thing. So it is a little bit difficult from a bilateral perspective, and that is the drawback from pursuing the bilateral agenda. So in terms of the agenda itself, and again Brett touched on a lot of this, it has been a busy 12 or 18 months for the government. They've been successful in signing 3 big trade agreements with Korea, Japan and China, and going through each of those agreements, Korea is a really good one for agriculture across the board. Most commodities came out of it really well in terms of elimination of tariffs, or certainly reductions in tariffs, of what is a really key market for the ag sector. Japan was a little bit more difficult. It's always going to be difficult with the Japanese market. They're very protectionist in their regimes for agriculture and got a strong advocacy or lobby group in Japan, so it was really going to be difficult to get an agreement with, or a good agreement with Japan, and it was nice to get one. We should recognise that we, as I think again Brett said, it was one of the first FTAs that Japan has done with an economy that has a strong ag sector. And China is obviously going to be a huge opportunity for the ag sector, with such a growing economy, fastest growing economy, if not the biggest economy in the world, one of the biggest, and a huge opportunity for Australia to supply some of that market. We're never going to be able to supply all of the Chinese market, of course. They've got countries over there, cities over there that are 20 million and more people. So we bear in mind that we've got the capacity to feed about 40 million. We need to pick our products, and I think there's an opportunity for us to be high quality suppliers of safe, traceable food, but a huge opportunity. The Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, that's an ongoing one that we thought was going to get signed on the weekend, but it fell over at one of the last hurdles. Again, it's huge opportunity with a couple of big economies like Japan, the US, Canada. But I think the interesting issue with the Trans-Pacific Partnership is that it potentially sets the new paradigm for trade agreements in terms of its 12 countries agreeing to eliminate tariffs across the board, and that's getting towards what I referred to in the World Trade Organisation as a whole, or a group of countries actually committing to liberalising trade, and it has proved more difficult than bilateral agreements. As I've said, more countries, more baggage, so it's a little bit more difficult, but it is, again, an opportunity to build on the bilateral agreements that we've got with 8 of those 12 countries, like Japan and the US, so we really see that as a benchmark in terms of lifting the bar for the opportunities. The agenda looking forward, the government's committed to trying to complete a free trade agreement with India. Again, a huge economy with huge opportunities. Whether we get that or not, or what the tangible benefits flowing out of that trade agreement remains to be seen. It's a pretty short time frame the government's committed to doing a trade agreement with India, so we'll have to watch that one. Longer term, European Union, Gulf states, and some of the regional agreements that Brett referred to. In terms of opportunities, again, I probably don't need to tell you guys it's huge positive time for Australian agriculture. If we can take advantage of the liberalisation that has presented itself with some of these trade agreements and some of the future trade agreements, the opportunities are really significant and in some ways endless for you guys coming into the industry, for the existing industry, and we must take advantage of those opportunities. Those new markets obviously mean more options. In a really basic sense, they mean more options and more opportunities for return for farm businesses right across Australia and right across commodities. So in terms of sort of signing these agreements, we must remember that we've got the agreement in place and the tariffs have reduced, hopefully, or eliminated at the end of the day with a bit of luck. But there's a whole range of non-tariff barriers that we need to address, and they are beyond border issues and certification technical issues that are really stopping some of the trade from getting through. So that's the next agenda item for the government to make sure that they put resources into actually fixing some of these beyond border issues. And of course they are guided by the relationships, the political relationships that Australia has with a whole range of countries. In terms of risks for trade, obviously we are export focused and we don't, things go wrong in a particular market, Indonesia for example, it does have a significant effect or can have a significant effect on a particular commodity. If you think about the banning of the live export trade, had huge ramifications in the northern part of Australia, but that also flowed back down through the red meat industry. So, there is risks in terms of putting all of our eggs in the China basket, for example, and that's why I think the mantra really is to be a niche provider in a couple of these key markets where the returns are greatest, and really focusing on those markets where the profitability can be maximised. Again, with some of these markets, you're looking at uncertainty and unreliability. Again, Indonesia and Russia probably jump to mind in terms of their fluctuating capacity and provisions that are available to continue trade. And at the end of the day, Australia has liberalised all of our markets largely. So we actually don't have a lot to offer in terms of a trade-off. We go to these trade agreements and the cupboard's really bare because we've done all of the hard work in terms of deregulation largely. A lot of other countries have got a lot of work to do in terms of subsidies and tariffs, but we've done a lot of that work. And again, these trade agreements are obviously driven and bound by our political relationships, and to a certain extent the free trade arena there's an underpinning of the geopolitical arrangements, and that's very much the case in an agreement like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where you've got America and Japan proposing to sign an agreement, and Korea and China looking on with interest in that whole Pacific rim. So that geopolitical environment plays really closely to the surface in terms of how these trade agreements get done. So that's a summary. I think, as I say, agriculture is hugely positive, and I think if I was graduating in the next couple of years, like you guys might be, I think there's massive opportunities, and I think the agriculture sector has got so much to gain and to build, not only from a trade perspective, but we're talking about digital innovation, new skills, new technology, so hugely positive. Exports will obviously be a focus for the ag sector for quite a while, as I say. Behind the border issues, non-tariff barriers, so we can reduce tariffs and get our products more competitive on the shelves. We've actually got to do the work beyond the borders to make sure that the product can actually get in on the shelf in addition or outside the tariff levels. And we can't rest on our laurels. We've actually got to take the opportunity and really drive the agenda. And hopefully it's you guys that will do that when you come out into the workforce, if you're not already. And really take that opportunity to drive what is huge opportunities, I think, for you and the rest of the sector. So I'll wind it up there, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
We've got time to have a few questions before we break, so if anyone's interested in asking a question, yes?
G'day, I'm Jesse. I heard you saying earlier that peat is a pretty big issue in Animals Australia and those sort of groups. I know they probably use a motive argument to get their way across. Is that a strategy that perhaps National Farmers Federation could use?
Yeah, it is. It certainly resonates well. You're right. They use pictures of sheep being shorn or injured. Absolutely. It's how we use those, how we tap into that perception and that feeling of the ag sector. I mean, it's my view and I think a view of a few others that there is a high level of trust and goodwill in the community for farmers and the work that they do and the products that they produce. So it's a matter of how we actually tap into that. And it clearly works. The emotive angle works. And you've seen, perhaps some in the dairy industry or in the horticulture industry, actually putting a face to the name. You've seen perhaps the SPC canned tomatoes have actually got a farmer, a picture of the guy that grows the tomatoes on the back of the can now. It's just going that way and actually saying these are people, they are in business, they do have to contend with a whole range of different activities, and putting a face to a name or putting a face to a product. And that's consistent with what's happening overseas. You pick up, strawberries or cherries or something, and they'll say that they're grown in this particular location. This is the guy that actually, or a woman that actually grew them. So, yeah, absolutely. And so, emotive language, but it's actually having that conversation with the community. And at the moment, we're kind of a bit disconnected. So, if that answers the question.
We've just got to...
You mentioned that productivity gains were one of the key platforms that you're looking to regenerate. That's all very well, but where's the research going to come from? And currently we've seen reductions in research funding, so how are we going to get the gains?
Yep. Yeah, it's a good question. We definitely need to, a couple of things I suppose. We need to increase the R&D, the actual level, I think, and the government's come to the party in some ways, offering up $100 million a couple of years ago and another $100 million from 2017 for R&D, for extra R&D for the ag sector. Got to actually get a commercial backing of that, so it can't just be government money, it can't just be RDCs doing it. We've actually got to try and engage the commercial sector so that they can get returns from their investment and get a better partnership. The other thing that I think we need to do is to actually get more out of the dollars that we spend. And in my mind, it's that application, that extension that is lacking. So we can do the research, and that's fine. We need to have that research. We actually need to build the bridge of getting that onto farm and making it really commercially focused so that every bit of research that we do is specifically targeted at getting a better return of better productivity or profitability on farm. Now, I know they'll probably say that they do that, but I think that we need to just have a closer look at how we're actually, where the dollars are being spent, how they're being spent, and what it actually means, how it transfers back to the family farm or the commercial farm business, because I think that's where the gap is for mine.
I've got a question up the front.
How's it going, Adam? The reason why, Peter, they're able to get such a following is because they're in a high traffic website, which is Facebook. You said your farmer's Facebook. How are you going to get consumer traffic through that?
Yep, good question.
You said it's just going to be farmers and their political following
Yeah,
profile. Why would a consumer really be interested in that?
Yep. Okay. Good question. So what it's the way that we're building this platform is that it's predominantly for the farm business sector. So people on farm. It's for stakeholders, but it's also for the community. So what we're looking at getting is all of the existing members of state farming organisations or commodity groups. They would become a member of this online platform. And so there's a group of existing people. But what we're also doing is offering a membership to the community. So instead of going and clicking on a Get Up or a Peter campaign for a particular issue, we will have an alternative one for the farm sector to say that if you support a farmer, click here. If you want to donate for a particular campaign, then click here. So it is built in a similar way. We're actually using their model that is so accessible, high traffic website, allows them to engage and understand what the farming sector does. So it'll tap into some of those mechanisms and mediums that promote a high traffic space. So really trying to engage the community. It is about farm businesses and best practice models and policy and all of that, but the other arm of it is engaging the community. So we're going to do everything we can through retailers and banks and other commercial avenues to tap into their networks to make it high traffic and make it accessible and available to the community. Does that answer the question? So very much targeted at trying to engage the community. That's all.
Tony McNeil here. Just a quick question on, right at the start you spoke about, within your early diagram, about human capital, and you also spoke about investment capital in there. What are your thoughts on the impact on investment capital that further free trade agreements and multilateral agreements for that matter could have on freeing up or making more capital available?
As a result of the free trade agreement?
Yeah.
Well, I think it sets a bit of a platform for the whether it's Japan or China or Korea or any other country around investment. What it does is build the relationship. So at a really high level, says that we're going to trade with each other, but hopefully it provides for and facilitates more investment across the board. So from my own personal perspective, I don't really care where the investment comes from as long as we get it. I think we desperately need it and have needed it for a good while. It's not coming from a domestic sense or domestic sources as much as we would like. So if we can keep a track on it and we can monitor it and manage it and make sure it doesn't have a negative impact and it flows from these trade agreements, I think it's got huge benefits for the ag sector.